So today we are going to start the how to deal with disappointment part of the Buddhism for daily life discussion series. How to deal with disappointment. But before we get into disappointment, let me refresh you a little bit of what we were discussing of the last 3 weeks now. So we were discussing about existence, and we mentioned that existence is really about satisfaction. Why satisfaction? Because people or a human in general would like to be happy, get what makes him happy, and refrain or push away what makes him unhappy. So there's a set of positive emotions that he would like to associate with, and then there's a set of negative emotions in one's mind that he would like to disassociate with. So I said emotions, but make it people, possessions, places, pastimes, or whatever that you interact with in a lifetime. So there's a set of things that you would like to associate with, that you embrace, and there's another set of external things that you want to push away, that you are repulsive of. So that's the nature of human existence. And you see that mind is split between two. One side likes certain things, the other side it repulses, it pushes away. So mind is in this split. And there's this paleontologist, they uncover how the life on earth came into existence. And they say the primary ingredient or primary cause or primary driver of life on earth is really the availability of water and oxygen. However, let me add another dimension to that. Earlier we were discussing that you could have your food and water. However, if you don't have the happiness or the hope, happiness and hope, if you don't have that, you would want to end your existence, because there's no point of existing. So our existence primarily revolves around this happiness and hope, pleasure and desire. However, now the paleontologists say that the essential ingredient for life on earth was water. But I think I'm going to add another dimension to that. These primordial microorganisms, they had desire. So that kept them going, and that was the primary cause or the primary driver of life on earth. Now, very interestingly, desire is also mentioned as food, or rather fuel in Pali canon. So the name given to that is ahara. Ahara literally means food, and it could also mean fuel. What fuels or propels? What fuels a propulsion? So desire is now in the forefront as the primary cause, primary driver of life, and we coined these two words, pleasure and desire, to be more Buddhist lingo, to be in accordance to more of Buddhist lingo. Instead of calling it happiness and the hope for happiness in simple terms, we call it now pleasure and desire. So the key question is the methodology that we used to get our to possess our happiness or pleasure or the desire, is it correct? Is our methodology correct? Now in our bodies again, let me get to a bit of biology again today. We have a delivery system. We have a delivery system of oxygen. Now what happens is that it's like a train where you have wagons, and whenever oxygen enters your lung, there are these small blood vessels, arteries, small capillaries. They pick up oxygen and they load themselves like a wagon on the train, and they take that oxygen through this ingredient called hemoglobin all the way to the cell. And at the cell, it does the energy creation. So there's excrete carbon dioxide, and they load the excrete carbon dioxide onto the same wagon, hemoglobin, and they take it all the way through the veins to the lungs, and then they dispose it. So that's how the oxygen delivery works in the body. And this oxygen delivery system, it's not 100% fail-safe, but it's quite amazingly, it's quite a good working model. I mean, humans, other animals who respirate through lungs, it's a fantastic system that it has been working for the entirety of the time of the human species. So having said that, it's also not 100% fail safe, because sometimes, like if you don't open the garage door, and if you turn on the vehicle, there's carbon monoxide, and carbon monoxide is more affinitive than oxygen, so it could get into the same wagon and it could kill you. So it's not a 100% fail-safe system. However, it's greatly a fail-safe, foolproof mechanism. Now my question is, our happiness, or the process, the methodology that we use for happiness, pleasure and desire, is it fail-safe? Now that's the question today. I often see that people use pleasure-making methods, and they have their desires, but it's not usually a fail-safe method. Why? Because people are 50% of the time they are unhappy. Very few people are happy all the time, or neutral all the time. Most of the people, they have some form of a burden that burdens them. And also when we say sad or unhappy, there's a range of sadness or unhappiness. Sometimes it could be just a small feeling of rejection, like a minor feeling of rejection, and then it can be a major hatred, animosity, and it could even lead towards a very powerful emotion of frustration, desperation, extreme sadness, being extremely miserable. Now that part, we know that it's painful. We would like to avoid that part. That's the part that we don't like. But however, what about the other part, the slight positive feeling, to all the way to that euphoric, ecstatic feeling that you have? Now often you would say that ecstatic, euphoric feeling is fine, but is it really okay like that? Is it really, is there no problem in that euphoria as well? Now I'll tell you my personal experience. Back in the day when I was a boy, at the prime of my youth, I used to date a lot of girls, and the reason that I wanted to get married was, at one point I was so unrestful of that, because you know, as a young boy you would move from person to the person. 3 months stops, so you move on to the next person, and then the good thing is that you also find the next girlfriend very easily. There's no it's not hard. So when that happened, I was feeling this unrestfulness. Everything is perfect, but what's the end of it? And frankly, I didn't know the answer for this. I did not have an answer. So I thought maybe getting married is the best thing. So that way I don't have to switch partners all the time. I can just stick to one and then get it over with. And that's why I got married. And often we do the same thing. We switch from one to the other, and most of the people are stuck in this in order to switch from one pleasure to the next pleasure. Now I spoke about dating and romantic life, but put it to your vehicles, put it to your jobs. So you switch from one to the other seeking pleasure. However, most of the people, they get stuck in trying to achieve the next target. The target doesn't come that easily. We discussed that we needed energy, money and time. We need these resources. So most of the people are stuck in this pursuit trying to achieve that goal, while some people, they just get their goal, which makes them happy, which makes them ecstatic, euphoric. However, that feeling of euphoria itself, it's not settling. Now there's no point of me telling you that. The only way to test it out is be euphoric, be ecstatic, try to have unlimited amount of fun and try to be unlimited happy. And when you try to do that, you still find this unsettlement in your life, and then you want to look what's next. So we have our sadness, which we want to avoid, and we also have our happiness, which we would like to gain, which we would like to have. However, if you go on that path, you see that path is also an end of the suffering. It is still some form of a suffering, that you have this unrestfulness. There's this void that you cannot explain. You are happy, you are euphoric. However, there's this void that you cannot be satisfied ultimately. So that's with that. And also in this process, I find a lot of people inhibit themselves. So in order to be, without achieving that 100% happiness, they try to inhibit themselves. They try to inhibit the laws, and the society try to inhibit, and various other reasons we were discussing the other day, the punishment, the law, and self-criticism, and the criticism or shame, blame from others, they inhibit us achieving our happiness. Now my personal advice is, if your life is not happy right now, if you think it's inhibited, try to break this barrier, try to break this inhibition, and then try to live your life. So in Buddhism, there are two right ways. Now, right way, we will discuss that later. Samma Ditti or Arya Ashtangika Marga, which is the proposed path for a person. Now, it's divided into two. What's the proposed path for a lay person, and what's the proposed path for a person who's in a noble seeking? It's two different two paths. The path would lead eventually to the noble seeking. However, if you don't want to go there yet, there's another path where you could live a proper life, and that involves being less inhibited and trying to find this happiness more than dwelling or staying in this sadness, misery or despair. So what happens is, back in the day, even before Buddhism occurred in India, there was this fantastic system where people used to divide their lives into four. If your average lifetime is 80 years, they would divide it into four parts, four quadrants of 20 years each. So the first quadrant was called the Brahmachari. Brahmachari period was the period where a person would do his studies, and he would do all the things that a kid would do, studying to the maximum. And then you have the second period where you will be entering the marriage life, where you will be starting your own work, your profession, your businesses. That's called the Gruhastha stage, where you are living a normal, lay, mundane life. And then comes the third category, which is called the Vanaprastha, which means that you are now, you are 40 years by this time, and you probably have kids who are 20 years. So you are free to get involved in social work. And you also, it's like a bridging period with the final stage of your life. You stay in this 20 years trying to find what is self-actualization. What's the purpose of living? Why do I live? And how can I help the society while I'm here? So you do that in that third category, third period. And then there's a final period, the sannyasi period, where you leave your lay life and enter into a path where you're totally dedicating your life to find the ultimate truth or the ultimate bliss of your life. So that's how the Indians did it a few thousand years ago. They have divided their life into four. And what is very nice about this lifestyle is that each lifestyle, you try to live the lifestyle to the fullest without inhibition. Now again, don't misunderstand, living life without inhibition does not mean that you act with your primary instincts, that you are like an animal, that you harm everyone. No, we have 10 commandments for that. We have a social norm for that. Like the 10 commandments in the Western world, there's a lot of commandments in the Eastern world, the Oriental world. It's called the Sila. So people have this checks. So you live according to these checks, but still you are not inhibited yourself. So that way you try to find your happiness. So again, what we learned from the past 3 weeks is that try to have an audit of your life. Audit your life. If you are 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, if you are 20 years, 20 might be a little too young to have an audit, but when you have some experience, try to audit your life and see if you have really lived a fulfilling life. Have you been sad most of the time, frustrated most of the time, anxious most of the time, or have you been ecstatic most of the time? And most of the time you find that most people would not be ecstatic or euphoric most of the time. They are just leaning slightly towards a sadness most of the time. Their lives are good, but there has been a lot of hardships, there has been a lot of bad memories more than the good memories. So see what is in your life, audit your life. And if you are not happy right now, take this very bold move of finding happiness without being inhibited. Now, it's also very dangerous advice. In fact, even Steve Jobs said something like that every day wake up in the morning and look at yourself in the mirror. If you are not happy with what you are doing right now, switch it. And personally, I didn't know Steve Jobs at the time, but my life has always been like that. Whenever I felt that life is not treating me nicely, I took a drastic change. So I left good places, I left good countries, I left good jobs, because it was not making me happy. So in a way, that's why I told you at the beginning, I would be qualified to talk about happiness in Buddhism, because I have been fairly happy in my life, because I took moves, but not necessarily they were good moves, they were bad moves. But again, looking back today, I think all these decisions that I made were really good, because that way I knew the limitation of happiness. So because of that, I am in a monkhood now, trying to see what is beyond happiness. Anyway, it's a dangerous advice. However, about these inhibitions, let me also tell you another story. One day there was this Zen monk who went all the way to a town on his horse. This horse was a huge horse, big horse, strong horse. So he went to the tavern, or he went to the place that people could stay over, and then he was trying to tie that horse on that little pole that you find in front of all the restaurants back in the day. Now you don't get it because you don't have to tie, you have to just park the car in the parking lot. So that pole was all full. There were a lot of horses on that, leashed onto that pole. So this monk, then what he did was, he saw another chair. He took that rein of the horse, and then he put it over the chair, and then he went inside. So this horse, very strong horse, he stayed an entire day waiting for that monk to return, because he thought he was really tied up to a very strong pole where he cannot unleash himself. So my advice is, now again, if you are leashed to something, unleash yourself. Try to get over this inhibition. Again, having said that, be responsible in doing that, be mindful of doing that. See if it's going to harm other people. If it's harming you, it's not good. But personally, that's why I said it's a dangerous advice, because it's not going to necessarily give you good results all the time, but it will give you some wisdom. Like previously we were discussing, that upon calamity, the God is going to smile on you. Why? Because he knows that calamity teaches you a lesson. Every time people have learned through catastrophes, they have learned through bad experiences. Good experiences generally don't teach people things. So that's why bad experiences will teach you things more harshly. You learn it the hard way. When it's good, you don't want to stop and learn something from that. But the most intelligent person, now intelligence is not in the general sense of intelligence, the most a person with a lot of wisdom, he would even learn the lesson when everything is perfect, when everything is going good. So that's what we have learned during the past week, and we have also put this into a decision making tree now, a decision making process diagram. I was a chemical engineer, and we used to deal a lot with these diagrams, process flow diagrams. So you have your happiness, and the question is the method correct? Now we are going to make a decision. Is your method of being happy, is your method of finding pleasure, the desire, is that the correct way? So if you think it's the correct way, then there's nothing to be worried. All you have to do is have the same happiness, totally fine. But if you think it's okay, but sometimes I feel that it's not the right way also, then what you can do is go back to happiness, be uninhibited, and try to be happy as possible, and see if it's the correct path. But if you are thinking that, well, I have tried both these paths, but there's something really wrong about that, then is the time that you really need to come and see what is behind this, and how can I find the mechanism, the methodology behind this, and how can I find to an ultimate bliss. So again, if it doesn't make any sense to you, try to be as happy as possible. You know that sadness no one likes, but the happiness, what's wrong with happiness? The happiness is okay. Everyone says to be happy. So if everyone says it's okay, and if you are 100% sure about that, try to find that happiness, ecstasy to the maximum. And still, if you find there's something wrong with that, then try to come back to your basics and try to see what's wrong with the happiness also. So that's what we discussed. And then we also discussed about the Nibbedika Sutta from Pali Canon, which was the penetrative exposition or the explanation of the Buddha's teaching. In that, we discussed what is sensual pleasure. Sights perceived by the eye, which are likable, desirable, agreeable, pleasant, sensual, and arousing. Sounds known to your ear, smells known to nose, taste known by the tongue, touches known by the body, which are likable, desirable, agreeable, pleasant, sensual, and arousing. These are not sensual pleasures. That's what says in that penetrative exposition. So we usually think what we see, what we perceive is really the pleasure, that is really the pleasure. But here it says that is not sensual pleasure. Sensual pleasure is something else. Sensual pleasure is also known in the Pali word kama. So what you see, what you hear, that is not kama. However, there are 5 kinds of sensual stimulations or ingredients that you need to have that sensual pleasure, which is called the kama guna in Pali. So what you see, what you perceive are really the sensual stimulations. They are not pleasure itself. They are not kama. And what is kama? Sankappa rago purisassa kamo, which means greed intentions, desire is the person's sensual pleasure. The world's pretty things aren't the sensual pleasures. How do we decode this now? So sensual pleasure of a person is based on a conceptual desire. That's the underlying message of this sutta or exposition. So kama guna or the ingredients, what does that mean? Ingredients or stimulations for pleasure. Now the other day we discussed about a particular table which is made out of wood, which should look like a nice buffet for a termite. But for a man, it's not food, it's just a wooden table. So you see a field of greenery, a pasture of green grass, that's food for a horse, but it's not food for a man. So you see, sometimes depending on our life form, certain things are desirable for us, or at least they can be ingredients for desire, but based on your life form where you are, it cannot be a desirous thing. Like for example, I was thinking right now, spring, it really smells outside. There's this smell because we are probably in a wetland. When you walk outside for a few minutes, it gets stuck into your body, it gets stuck into your jacket, and you have to wash it every time you walk out. But these geese, the Canada goose, the other birds, the swans, they love it. For them, it's a pleasurable place. It's like probably a 5-star hotel for them. They travel all the way from different parts of the world, migrate to this wetland, and they sit here thinking, wow, this is Hilton, this is Sheraton, this is you know, the 7-star hotel chain that we have, like a human would go. And if you take a dog again, or a pig, pigs, they love to play in mud. And if you keep the pig on a white mattress, which is clean, which is immaculate, he would not like it. He would naturally go to the mud pool. He would want to play in that puddle of mud, and then that's what makes him happy. So you see that ingredient of happiness, or the stimulation that a person has, or any life form has, is very much based on his life form. Not every life can enjoy things equally. So that is how we can decode what is the ingredient for pleasure, or kama guna. But past this point, past this, you find this comment that beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Let's say that we take people. Now we avoid the Canada goose and all the pigs and horses. It's all human now. But within human, what makes one happy would not make the other person happy. Now why does that happen? Now in my travels again to the east, in Cambodia, in the Philippines, I have tasted some different meat, dog meat, snake meat, frog meat, where usually people even in Sri Lanka, they don't consume that. So one day I was given dog meat as a living, you know, there was this gentleman who was very happy to offer me that. He thought it was a great thing to do, so he offered me dog meat. And usually people don't eat dog, but people eat chicken, they eat steak, they eat all the other meats which are edible. But for people in this part of the world, dog meat is off limits. They don't eat it. But however, if you are trained, if your society says it's really okay to eat dog meat, it's totally fine for you. So the same dish of dog meat and the chicken meat, or let's say you have a plate of chicken and plate of a dog. So the chicken, we would love to eat that. So that's our split mind. We love it. The dog meat, we want to get away from that dish. But it's different for a different person on a different part of the world. culturally right for him. He would like dog meat, and in fact he would consider dog meat to be a great cuisine. It's like a great dish for him. So you see, past that ingredient or stimulation for pleasure, the pleasures you have are very much conceptual. Now, how did this concept came to be? He just learned it since his childhood that this is the right way to do it. So the right and wrong, good and bad you have is very much culturally acquired. So we'll get into what is culturally acquired, what is innately there. We'll get into that later. However, that you see, most of the goods and bads that you find are culturally acquired. So we also discussed about the King Oedipus story, how a mere paradigm shift in mind changed his view on how he looked at his mother or the wife. Because we know the King Oedipus story, he was seeing the same person. Through the images, he was seeing the same image. So one day he saw that image as the wife, and the next day he saw that image as a mother, his own mother. So that image was so it was so painful to him, he just blinded himself. So he thought karma or the pleasure is really in the image that you see. He did not think for a moment that karma or the pleasure or the desire really sits on the concept that you have, not the image that you see. The image that you see is only an ingredient, it's only a stimulation. Again, from life form to life form, it's different. However, if you take one life form, it's basically your conceptual understanding of something that makes it good or bad, pleasurable or displeasurable. So we discussed what happened to King Oedipus and how a mere shift of paradigm changed the same image into something else. So we find, or we think, we are in the belief, we are in the conviction that pleasure is always sourced from outside. But we only really source the ingredient from outside. We only source the stimulation. We do not source the pleasure. The pleasure is attached to a concept, a notion, an abstraction, a belief or conviction, whatever you name it, you know that it's not sourced from outside. So that's what we learned. But we always chase outside. Now you understand this, however, no matter how much I tell you, you always chase pleasure, you seek pleasure from outside. Now that's the counterintuitiveness of our existence. You don't chase for pleasure inside, you chase for pleasure from outside. So what should have King Oedipus really done? He should have blinded his internal eye, not the external eye. The external eye is only going to give him pain and surgically remove the eye, but he would not get rid of his internal pain because he is now suffering. Just because he blocked the ingredient, the source is still inside, the pleasure is still inside, and the repercussions of the pleasure is still inside. So that was not a proper thing to do. So now having said that, we always chase outside. There's also this concept of a third eye. Now usually we see outside through our normal physical eyes. But what if you turn on, like a camera, a third eye which is focused inwards? Now that's your inner eye. And even in Buddhism, sometimes it's mentioned as lighting a candle of wisdom. So you are in complete darkness, not about the outside darkness, about the inside world. You are in complete darkness. So you light the wisdom, the candle of wisdom or the lamp of wisdom. So in a moment, momentarily, that you find that everything is so clear that my pleasures are all conceptual. Now this might be a very simple message, but it's a very profound message. And again, knowing something and really understanding something and that becoming part and parcel of your existence are totally three different layers of understanding. So we'll get into what is knowledge, what is understanding also at a later point of time. So we have that. But broadly speaking, we can divide our bodily world and our mind world into two, or rather our physical world, our mental world. Now, however, these two, we for the ease of our discussion, for simplicity, we divide it to physical world and mental world, or body related world and the mind related world. However, it's not so simple to dissociate it also, because there's a huge connection between those two. But often when you find, or when you try to test your limitation, or when you try to observe yourself, that you will find most of the time, it's my rule of thumb is that whenever you have a problem, whenever you have something, it's 20% body, 80% mind. So that's my parity rule. You know, the rule of parity. 80% of the time it's not the body. Your body right now, it sits in perfect harmony. It's most of the time, unless you are you have a ailment, you have a physical discomfort, most of the time your body is in perfect shape, but your mind is the one which is in an imperfect shape. So when people tell me their grievances, I ask them to write their 20 most common problems, or the 20 problems which pesters them the most, and then I ask them to categorize them to the body related problems or the mind related problems, or rather physical problems and mental problems. And like always, most of the time it's mostly mental related problems, that problems we have created ourselves because of our conceptual errors, because our methodology is wrong, not because of anything else. So in a way, the mental world, that's the problem with that. So to elaborate on that point a little longer, let me also share this thing about what we see as a person. So we see a spectrum of things. So as a human, we have a visible range of light, of electromagnetic waves that we can perceive through our eye. But having said that, scientists have found that there's a whole range of electromagnetic waves. So Hubble telescope can capture ultraviolet to infrared a little further, and there are other telescopes which could capture more, even up to radio frequencies. Our radio captures the radio frequencies, and then there's a whole set of frequencies here. However, we only see a small strip, a small portion of the entire electromagnetic spectrum. And I'll show you this image. This is an image of a flower that you normally see versus a image of a flower which is seen through ultraviolet. So you see, ultraviolet gives you a whole different set of information. It tells you where the honey is probably to a bee. But as human, we don't see all that information. We only see the beautiful flower, the sunflower. But if you look at the same thing in ultraviolet, you find a whole different picture. And the Hubble telescope, again going back to what Hubble telescope does, it gives us these images. Now this is a picture taken through the Hubble telescope. Now how does that Hubble telescope give that all pictures? Now you probably know these pictures are not visible to our naked eye, which means the pictures Hubble telescope takes or captures, they are not visible to our naked eye, but they are frequencies in that electromagnetic spectrum. So some are infrared frequencies, some are ultraviolet frequencies, some could even go to radio wave frequencies. We can't see them. There's no simple way of human naked eye to see them. However, what the Hubble telescope does is it captures that frequency and then it translates to a color where humans can see. It interprets and show it to you. See, this is your nebula, this is your black hole, this is your whatever the star, this is your Alpha Centauri. That's what Hubble does. So Hubble telescope essentially takes something, it interprets that, assigns a value. Let's say that it captured the frequency of 300 gigahertz. It assigns the value, okay, I'm going to call 300 gigahertz yellow, and it is showing us the image of a yellow star. So that's what Hubble does. So why I took that example, like Hubble telescope, we also have a Hubble telescope image processor sitting inside our conceptual brain or conceptual mind, whatever you call it. We see things and we interpret it and give values and make them either positive things or make them bad things. So we have this continuous interpretation happening inside our mind, and it's like we see a brush stroke, but that brush stroke, the stroke of a brush, paint brush, is not anymore just a stroke, it becomes a painting. So our mind continuously do that. We see things, we see stimulations, but our mind continuously interpret these stimulations to meaningful things. Now the problem is that these things are meaningful, yes. One part is likable, the other part is dislikable. However, these likes and dislikes, we think that what we are seeing is really the pleasure, and then we seek the likable things, we try to refrain, we try to push away the dislikable things, the things that we don't like. So that's what happens inside our mind. So you see that our conceptual brain, things that we see becomes interpreted to things that make sense now, and we call them concepts for the time being. And how are these concepts formed? Now I'll tell you an example. Before coming to Canada, I haven't tried maple syrup, but I have heard of maple syrup. I didn't know what it was like, but I already knew what bee honey would look like. I already knew what honey in general looks like. I also have seen the maple leaf and the viscosity of the maple syrup. And based on those existing concepts, I have already made a concept within me before really tasting the maple syrup, that this is how maple syrup is going to taste. And when I tasted it, well, it was more or less similar to what I was imagining. And then through my experiences, I have made a new concept called maple syrup. Now, I don't know if that example was clear enough. Again, I haven't seen much lemons before I moved to Europe. I have only seen limes back in Sri Lanka. So when I went to Europe, there were more lemons than lime. Lime was not very available there. So I have heard of lemons. I knew lime, and I knew that lemon should be something like a lime. It should be tasting more or less the same. It should look the same. So I have already a pre-existing concept. On that concept, I build my future concept. Some of you might have not seen how pepper is grown, how coconuts are grown. So unless again, if you don't check it on YouTube, you don't know how it is grown. So right now you probably know these are the pepper seeds, this is pepper, and this is coconut, and this must be grown in places like this. So this is how a pepper or a coconut should ideally look like. But when you go to a tropical country, you see pepper or you see coconut, and then you develop or update your concept to match what you see, or based on what you see, you update your conceptual imaginary concept or the form which sits in your mind. Same thing happened to Columbus. He thought, if I traveled all the way towards the Atlantic, I'm going to find Indians. So he came all the way to America, and then he saw people, he called them Indians. So that's how we have the native Indians. So he had a concept that Indians are like this. Probably he has seen 1 or 2 Indians in his lifetime, and he thought traveling all this way, or probably he hasn't, because that's why he called the native Indians the Indians, because they look quite different. So still in his mind, he came up with the concept Indians, and he attached to the brushstroke that he saw, he made it a painting. I don't know if what I'm saying makes sense. I will also share something. You have probably seen this or have heard this old story of the Zen monk who was trying to offer tea to his student. So the story goes like this. There was this Zen monk. He had a student who approached him. The student was supposed to be a very learned scholar. Scholars usually, they are also quite adamant. They are quite condescending. They have their own opinion usually. When you are too learned, when you have a PhD, you are permanently head damaged. So this student approached the monk, and the monk said, "Fine, before I teach you my wisdom, let me offer you a cup of tea." And then he placed the cup in front of him, and then he took the tea jug, and then he was pouring tea. So then at one point, the tea was overflowing. So then this student said, "Sir, I think it's time to stop this pouring of tea." Then the teacher said, "Well, you know the story most of the time. The normal story goes, your mind is full like that. You first need to unlearn what you have learned so far, clear your cup, and then I can teach you something new." Now that's the normal story. That's the story that everyone speaks about. But again, there's a more deeper meaning into that Zen example. Now, you know that a learned person could be not so humble as a unlearned person. And let's take an unlearned person who's not a scholar, who's just an average human being, who's very humble. However, even this most humble person, he already has his own cup full. Why do I say that? When Sri Lankan sees me, he always sees a monk. And if I go to an African country and meet a set of bushmen who have never come out of their own little land, little forest, they would not see me as a monk. They would see me as a man, a human man, and they would not call me a monk. But everyone who knows me, at least who knows Buddhism, they would only see a monk. So you see, your cup is already full. You cannot unsee a monk here. You only see a monk. Right? Does that make sense now? So the real story of this Zen example is not that you have to be humble or anything. Even if you are the most humble person, your cup is still full. You have gathered so much of concepts since your childhood, and because of that, you cannot see or you cannot unsee me as a monk. Whereas a Bushman, he doesn't see me as a monk, but if you teach a Bushman that this is a Buddhist monk, he will start seeing me that way. Why? Because his concept gets updated. So that's what happened when it happens to you. Now a quick acid test to see if what I'm saying is true. It's very easy. All you have to do is take a glance across your room. Can you find anything that you do not know? That you do not know what it is? You see computers, you see lampshades, you see windows, you know everything. So you see, your cup is super full right now, right? So that is the real meaning of that Zen story. When we grow as children, our cups get full. It gets fuller. So right now, it's totally full. Let's say that somehow I came across this thing which I don't know, that I'm a Bushman. I didn't know what this is. Still, I would know it. What do I mean by that? Still, I would know that this is something abnormal. So still, my cup is full. Do you get it? Even if we come across a magical item which is not known to us, still we know that it is not normal. It is abnormal. So we have a concept sitting in our mind saying this is an abnormal object. And more we perceive it through our touch, through our smell, taste, etc., we start forming this idea, concept around it, and then we call it a name, and then we have a concept updated. So initially our concept was abnormal, now it become a form. So you see how concepts are formed. So that is the life of us. And why am I saying that? Is because if you have decided, if you went into that decision tree earlier, the process flow diagram, and if you decided, we really want to look into why disappointment happens. What's the mechanism behind this? Why is my delivery not fail-safe? Delivery system not fail-safe? So if you want to look into that, that is when we want to go and see what is really underneath in the layers that we cannot see. Okay, so then life is about as and when you go along your life, when you gain experiences, during your life, you come up with these interpretations. You start forming interpretations. In fact, we will get into what forms are when we discuss, if we discuss the more philosophical terms of 5 aggregates of Buddhism. There's this thing called forms. In fact, not only Buddhism, even Plato speaks of forms. He wrote a book called the Book of Forms, roughly translating. So forms are really the interpretations, concepts which are in your mind. And these forms are very personal and very mental. It's very personal and very mental. Now, you usually use the word mental when we're kids to imply a psycho, mental. So Buddha also has said something like this, that all worldlings are mental in one way or the other. Now, what is mental and what is not mental? The sanity and insanity is a very fine line. You know, what is sanity in one country could be a insanity in another country. So it is, while it is very, it's a very thin line. What Buddha means here is that we seek for pleasure from outside world, and that is the insanity mentioned here. That is the mentalness or the psychoness which is mentioned here. While now that you know, while the pleasure or karma is an internal property, it's a conceptual property, the desire and pleasure is a conceptual property. However, we seek for pleasure from outside. Now that is being mental. Sorry. So that's what's meant by this. So all these cognitive distortions, we take them as real, and we think that is the reality, and we try to live in that reality. It's like trying to live in a dream world. I'm not saying life is a dream world, but life is also not true as it appears. So the question again is, would you like to live in this distorted cognitive distortion? Would you like to live in this very personal, very mental, interpretations based, conceptual based mind world, where you have your pleasures and where you have your displeasures? So that is the fundamental thing that we discussed over the last 3 weeks. However, since I got late a little also, the time has almost run out for me to discuss what's there for today. But let me quickly try to touch base on disappointment. I think we'll have to discuss it the next week as well. But let me take that there's this word called chanda in Pali Canon, or chanda. Chanda means impulsiveness, excitement, intention, or resolution. Now in Sinhala, in the language in Sri Lanka or in Pali, chanda means also the vote. So when you have to cast your vote, it's called do the chanda. So chanda also means vote there. Now very interestingly, a vote is a preference you have. It's a choice you have. It's a choice that you make. So these choices are based on likings. So you don't vote for the person that you don't like, you vote for the person that you like. So you make a choice. And usually these choices, these likenesses are based on an expectation. This person is going to do good for our country, to our economy, to our democracy, whatever. So you have an expectation based on your liking, so you make a choice. And this chanda, we make this chanda, or we make these intentions, resolutions all the time. We like a particular color. I like this color over this color. I like this food. I like chicken over dog meat. I like white over black. So everyone makes this intentions, or has these intentions, likeness. And what is the reason, or what is really behind this chanda? Now every time we try to uncover things, we see what is behind it. So let me take another quick example. Okay, a very nice way to understand what is behind chanda is to find an answer for this. What is the most common, or what's the only reason for divorce? People get married and then they get divorced. What's the reason for divorce? So usual answers, since I'm not asking you today, the usual answers would be there's incompatibility. In fact, in order to get divorced, you need to, there's adultery, there's impotence, there's malicious dissertation. So there's all form of things. And usually you would find that our ideas don't match. We don't match physically. There's some form of an involvement, there's extramarital affairs. So those are the answers why people get divorced. But again, if you really think about this answer, what's the true cause of divorce? The only true cause of divorce is getting married. Nothing else but getting married. Why? If you don't get married, you cannot get divorced. Now that might sound like a joke, but it's really the truth. The cause for divorce is getting married. So what's the reason for despair? What's the reason for hopelessness? Now you know the answer. The reason for despair or hopelessness is having hopes. If you did not have hopes, if you did not have chanda, there's not going to be any despair. As simple as it might sound, this is the reason. But again, now we say all these things. There's also this saying, I can say things, everything is philosophical as long as the problem is not yours. Now that happens. So we need to really apply this in our daily life. That's why this whole discussion was called Buddhism for daily life, not for philosophical life. These things have to be practical. Hopelessness is because we make hope. But the only way we know how to live is through hope. Why? We said hope and pleasure are the key ingredients why a person wouldn't kill himself. If he doesn't have hope, if he doesn't have pleasure, he would not want to live anymore. So this hope is based on a conceptual desire. What we see, what we hear, what we taste, what we perceive are only ingredients, they are only stimulations. However, we have a concept inside our mind saying that this is good, this is bad. Associating the things we like gives us pleasure, associating with things that we don't like gives us pain, getting away from things that we don't like gives us pleasure, getting away from things that we like gives us sadness. So it's a very simple formula. Now let's see how we can apply this to daily life. So the reason for despair is always being hopeful. And while we become hopeful, you will also see that all our hopes are attributed to the outside world. They are not attributed to the inside world. Our hopes, our dreams, they are always based on external things, which I commonly categorically divided it into the physical world or the bodily world or the mental world or the mind world. So it's always sitting on the physical world. So is it fair to be hopeful? Can we always justify our hopes? Are they justifiable all the time, or are they unjustifiable? So let me take a few hopes that a man could have. I want the sun to rise from north every morning. Now that is a hope which is totally unjustifiable. You would call me a madman if I call that. I have a great wish that sun should always come from the north. Or I want everyone to be born equal. The same size, same shape, same color, same IQ, same EQ. I want everyone to be born equally. Even no gender difference, equal. I want people to be like that. I want people to be happy, or I want to be happy always. I have a hope. See, these hopes we cannot justify because they would not happen that way. And if we look at how do we create expectations, expectations are most of the time created through recommendation from friends, from your peers. How? If you want to see what's a good movie these days, we go to IMDb and see what are the reviews on the good movies. That's how we find a recommendation for a good movie. If we want to go on and stay in a hotel, we go to TripAdvisor and sees which hotel has been given the highest peer ranked or peer reviews. So that's how we get expectations. Or we go to Google reviews. You know, if you want to check out a restaurant, we see what are the reviews. If you want to go to a monastery, we go and see what are the reviews on this monastery. Are they good or bad? So based on peer review, we make our choices. We make our expectations. And we have our chanda or our votes to get into a path. So while these expectations are mostly based on peer review or recommendation, we sometimes experience things. We experience music, we experience colors, and then based on what we experience, we also come up with these expectations. Well, I experienced honey, now I want to expect that I am going to have maple syrup. I experienced lime, now I am expecting, my expectations are to taste lemons. I tasted coconut powder or coconut liquid here, so I want to taste a real coconut in a tropical country. So that is how we make expectations based on experience. However, there's a problem with this. The problem is that our expectations or our experiences are really based on our experience making equipment. What do I mean by that? Our experience making equipment where the images are concerned is the eye. But I just showed you that image. I can only see a small strip of the real electromagnetic wavelength. It doesn't show us the ultraviolet view. It doesn't show us the infrared view. It doesn't show us many views that we cannot see. So our equipment itself is a very limited equipment. So all the judgments that we take through this limited equipment, erroneous equipment, are going to be a wrong judgment. It could become wrong. There's high chance that it could our judgment can be wrong. Why? Because our expectations and the judgment was made based on a wrong equipment. If you have a false thermometer, if you put it to the snow and see what temperature it is, it's going to give us 100 degrees Celsius, which is not true. But because the equipment says so, we are trying to go to that snow and then we are trying to walk on that snow. It is going to give us frostbites. So likewise, people with their wrong equipment experience the world, and they come into conclusions, they come into judgments, and then they try to experience this world and end up with displeasure, end up with misery. So all the judgments that we have taken based on our 5 perceptions are bound to go wrong, because ear can only listen to frequencies between 20,000 to 20 hertz. Beyond that we cannot. The bats can, the dolphins can, we can't. The lower frequencies can be heard by the dogs, the elephants, but we can't. We only hear music between 20,000 hertz to 20 hertz. And even touch. Say, take taste. We never taste what real water tastes like. We always taste the minerals dissolved in that. We cannot taste the water. Water is tasteless. We cannot taste, or we cannot smell the air. If air is not unless it's polluted, or unless there's a smell in it, air is generally smellless. But an animal, or if we go to Mars, for example, we would probably sense methane. In Mars, there's methane. So a Martian, assuming that there's a Martian, for him, he would not smell the methane. But he comes to Earth, he would start smelling nitrogen and oxygen. So you see, what we sense and what we think real are based on a equipment which only shows us a very small patch of an entirely huge infinite spectrum. So the judgments that we take on based on that are going to be naturally wrong. And the second thing is, when we make expectations, we are also a little cunning in making that expectations. Why? We don't try to make expectations, or we don't try to make hopes about the ocean, about the sun, about the wind. We don't expect these things to be under our control, because we know that they are not going to work the way we like. But we only make expectations most of the time about controllable things. Unless you have grandiose thoughts that I can move sun here and there, unless you are like that, a sane person again does not make expectations about things that he cannot control. So then people think about expectations that they can control. So what are really controllable, and what are the expectations that people make based on their controllable things? 4 P's, places, like your house, which is under your control. You want to make expectations. People, your spouse, your partner, your children, you want to make expectations for them. Pastimes, activities that you can do. I like yoga, I like jogging, I make expectations on that. And possessions, I like my phone, I like my computer, I make expectations. Why? I can control them, I can switch them, I can color them, I can throw them away, I can buy a new one. They are under my control. Now this is a very interesting thing. We don't make expectations on everything. We have some amount of wisdom built in on us. We don't make expectations on the sun and the ocean and the wind, but we make expectations on things that we can control. Now let's see about this controllability. The controllability and the ownership that you have are very much linked. Why do I say that? Now you call your house, my house, because I have control in it. Minus ego is always associated with controllability, how controllable it is to you. Now, people say Canada is your country because you have a democratic right to take decisions for Canada. You can vote for Canada. So that is why Canada is my country. And my house is my house because I can change the color, I can change the ceiling, I can change the lighting, I can change my house, I can even sell this house. So whenever I have more control you have, more ownership you have, more mine it becomes. So you have a range of things. Canada is mine, but it's not very mine. America, it's not mine. I can't do much about what the politicians in that country are going to do, but I can do something about what the politicians in Canada are going to do. So it is mine, but it is not as mine as my house. Why? Our roads are public roads. They are public. However, this is my neighborhood. It's my neighborhood. Why? I have a email group where I can send mails and make suggestions and do things in my neighborhood. But the next neighborhood is not mine. It's less mine. However, it's my region, it's the Waterloo region, so I have some say over that. So more controllable it is, more mine it becomes. In fact, if you list down everything according to your controllability, you would find sun, moon, ocean, they are the least controllable, so we don't even consider them my sun. Unless we don't see another sun also, so they are not mine. But my country is there, and my county is there, my neighborhood is there, my house is there, my room is there, my bed is there, and then comes my body. And then there's my mind, who's the king on top of that, who's sitting on all that. So if you list down everything, you find that these things, based on their controllability, I call it more self, more mind, belonging. It belongs to me. However, all these things that I listed, are they really under your control? Is your neighborhood really under your control? Right now there's this neighborhood here, I think it's the Blair village. They are having a protest against a huge Amazon warehouse which is going to come up right next to him. So they do not have control over that. The governor has made the choice for them, and they are protesting against that. They do not have control. So all this time, for the last, I don't know, 70 years, 40 years probably, they were thinking that this is my neighborhood. And they all of a sudden realized, well, it is not so mine, because I only have a partial control over it. Another politician or an administrator can come and do something else which I do not like. So you see that you don't have full control over your neighborhood. Do you have controllability over your house? Now I painted it, I did all the deco. However, yesterday there was a wind and a tree collapsed and my house was crushed, or there was a fire, my house was burned to ashes, to nothing. So I do not really have controllability over that. My body is mine, my limbs are mine. However, yesterday I got a heart attack and one side of my body got paralyzed. I cannot even lift a pinky now. So is my body really under my control? I don't have to talk about mind. You know that mind is not really under your control. You think that it's under control, but most of the time it is not. That's the whole problem that that's the whole issue that we are trying to address also, mastery of mind. So you see that when nothing is really fully under your control, can you call any of these yours? You call it your neighborhood, you call it my body. But the definition of my or belongingness or ownership is being able to have control over it, perform, exercise control over it. But when nothing is really fully 100% under your control, can you call anything fully yours? Let's take a quick example before I wrap up. Let's take a Uber car. You book the Uber car on your phone. You book your Uber. So I get onto that Uber. The driver is driving me from to my departure point, or my point that I want to get off. So while I'm riding this Uber car, I think it's my Uber ride. But is it really my Uber ride? It is not. The driver, any moment that he wishes, he can push me out of the car and then he can say, well, I'm not going to take you. So it's not really my Uber ride. The Uber company can decide, I'm not going to give this guy because he has so many negative remarks, I'm not going to accept his ride. So Uber company can throw me out. The police can put me out of the Uber car. In fact, there could be a snowfall and I could not be able to go on that car. I would need a different snowmobile to go on that car, on that route. So you see, although I think this Uber ride is mine, I only have a partial ownership, a fractional ownership. So because of that fractional ownership, I also have a fractional controllability. So fractional control, fractional ownership. But that is not the outlook I have about my life. I think my children are my children. I have full ownership over them. I think my body is my body. I have full ownership over this. So you see that we don't have full ownership over things. Neither we have the full controllability over things. Now the problem is, when we don't have full controllability, how can you make full expectations? It's very simple. When you don't have full controllability, we don't expect the sun to rise from the north, because it is not simply under our control. But we expect for us to have a good life, to come across good food. We expect to listen to music. We expect to have a good democratic environment, a safe environment. We expect that. But is it really under our control to expect? So what's the cause for divorce? Is getting married. What's the cause for despair? Is being hopeful on wrong things. Our expectations, our hopes are really cannot be really validated. Fundamentally, there's something wrong that we did. We made hopes thinking that these things are controllable. However, we only have fractional ownership. Hence, we have fractional controllability. So we do not have controllability over that. So that's the message that we have. And again, I'll take a couple of more minutes before I wrap up again. I really wanted to show this interesting guy that I found on internet. His name is Bansky. Bansky is an anonymous artist. So Bansky had this picture, girl with a balloon. I think he's a British artist, and he's anonymous. No one know what Bansky looks like. So his initial portrait of this painting was sold at 1.4 million dollars or pounds. This particular portrait, and people were expecting to take it home. The one who bid for that, he was expecting to take it home and hang it, saying this is a painting from Bansky. However, Bansky is such a amazing person. What he did was he had a small attachment to his painting. So it was a shredding machine attached to the frame of the painting. So right after it was finalized, 1.4 million, he just shredded this painting into pieces. And guess what happened afterward? The shredded pieces, they were auctioned at even higher rate. They were auctioned at I think about 14 million. So no, 24 million. So this happened to Bansky, but I think the message that Bansky was trying to give was really nice, that nothing in this world is really under your control. That person, imagine that person who bought Bansky's painting for 1.4 million, it just got shredded in front of his eyes. Well, good for him that it got sold for 24 million again. But our life is such. We make expectations thinking that we have control over things. I'm not saying we do not have control over things. Like, I want to pick up my phone, I can pick it up. However, this is not true all the time. If my body gets paralyzed, I won't be able to do that. If this phone gets destroyed, I won't be able to do that. So we only have a partial ownership. So it's safer to have partial expectations. But we do not do that. We only have 100% full expectation. When a person is getting married, would he have a partial expectation? Well, I could be married, or I could get divorced. He does not have that balanced view. He's only like that horse who only sees the tunnel vision. He only sees one side of it. That is how we make expectations. But if you can have a more balanced view, well, I only have a partial controllability. I only have a partial ownership. Hence, my expectation also have to be partial. It could go right or it could go wrong. So if you can make an expectation like that, uh, your despair would be that much lower. I bought another bottle. I bought a bottle recently from IKEA, which is it's all glass. And when I was buying, the others were saying you're going to break it very soon. So what I did was I lowered the expectation of the bottle, and I'm always keeping it on the floor, because what is on the floor cannot be fallen to the floor because it's on the floor. So likewise, if you make big expectations, you're going to be devastated that much. But if you have low expectations, that is the only amount that you're going to fall. So similarly, there's also this very quick thing I want to show. There's a beach called Boracay in Philippines. Every year they have this competition where you have to make sand art. So they make this beautiful sand art, and the funny thing is every year they have to repeat it again. Why? Because the waves, the rain, it takes away the sand art. And that sand art is so beautiful, so detailed. It's such a waste to see that sand art is gone. So as kids, back in the day, we also used to go to the beach and make sand castles. However, I saw that when I took my kid to the beach, we would make sand castles, and that when a sand castle is washed away, through with the waves, he would cry for that. As a kid, I have cried when my castle got washed away. But adults don't cry for that. Now, why is that? Why does that happen?
Adult knows this is the nature of the beach. If you make a sandcastle on the beach, it is bound to get wiped away, like that fantastic, beautiful sand art and in Boracay Island. But they are bound to get wiped away the next year. That's why they have to have it annually. So no matter how beautiful you build that sandcastle, how strong you build your sandcastle, that is the nature of the beach. It is going to get wiped away. So an adult with wisdom, he knows that, he accepts that. He does not have an expectation for the sandcastle to be there forever. So he still, having said that, he also doesn't stop building sandcastles. He builds sandcastles knowing that it's going to get washed away one day. So you make expectations knowing these expectations can get shattered anytime. But because you already know that, you don't get shattered. So that is the message of Buddhism for daily life today. Our expectations are based on a wrong platform. They are based on a wrong foundation. They're fundamentally wrong. Number one, we don't have full control to make that expectation. Number two, our judgments, our peer recommendations are based on a very wrong equipment. That equipment only gives a fraction of the reading of the entirety. So we cannot make a sound decision based on that wrong equipment. And we seek things, pleasures from outside world, from the external world, but really these are sitting as concepts. The concepts get updated, they change, we learn. In fact, learning itself is really updating our concepts. And because of all this, we will discuss in further why it happened one by one. So expectations, making of expectations is fundamentally wrong. The chant itself is a wrong act. However, our life is based on hope. Now, that's a sad thing. So, I think we should really feel sorry about that. We discovered in the beginning that our life is based on pleasure and sadness. Pleasure is conceptual, it's mental. Uh, Sorry, not pleasure and sadness, pleasure and hope. Pleasure is a conceptual desire, and hope, our expectation, is also based on wrong foundations. So these things are bound to go wrong. So a life which is built on this foundation will never find a bliss. So if you need to have a bliss, that's why I said in the decision tree, do you want to see if you want to have that bliss or not? So if you are currently in the sad state, try to come to the happy state. Come to that euphoric side, the ecstatic side, and find happiness. Let go your inhibition, your own personal attachments, like that horse had. It's a it's a it's a uh, it's a the what has tied you to this, or what has inhibited you, is a small string. You can break it. So come to this, cross over to this happy side, and in this happy side, see if you find a tiredness in that happy side. See if that's still there's some discomfort in that happy side. In order to do that, you need to be really lucky and get to that happy side. So to do that, you might need money, time, and energy. But now you know you don't need all that, because to be happy, you can do it internally. You only have to switch a concept. Having said that, it's not so simple to do that, because you cannot simply switch concept. Why? You cannot unsee me as a monk. You only see me as a monk. So you cannot do it that way. But there's a different way to change your concept. In fact, cognitive behavioral therapy is about how you switch your concept to a different concept. Cognitive behavioral therapy. They call it neuro-linguistic programming also. Our language is very much connected with what we think, the concepts we have. So through language, neuro-linguistic channels are created so that you think, you look at the world from a different lens. So Buddhism is not about changing lenses. Buddhism is taking the lenses all together away and then trying to see what's really inside. So that is how, for the time being, you deal with disappointment. Disappointment is based on making expectations. Divorce is because you get married. Disappointment is because you make hopes, dreams, which are bound to get shattered, because that's the nature of it. It's like the sand castle on the Boracay beach. So with that, I will end the session for today. And everyone, have a good evening.
you.